Hello everyone, this is Brett Rathbun. I'm a meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Albany, and I will take you through part 5 of this SKYWARN Spotter Training series covering heat, excessive rainfall, and flooding. New for this year, the National Weather Service is going to be consolidating and renaming our heat weather products. And this effort is part of what is called the Hazard Simplification Project, which is working to rename some of our watch and warning products to enable more clear and timely decision support. So when it comes to the heat watches and warnings, we are going to be converting from excessive heat watch and excessive heat warning now to extreme heat watch and extreme heat warning. An extreme heat watch is issued when dangerous heat is possible, and that is a preparedness stage similar to the severe weather watches and warnings. And when we issue an extreme heat warning, that is when dangerous heat is happening or about to happen, so that is when action should take place. When it comes to heat, to determine how hot a day is going to be, we use what is called a heat index. We also sometimes use the word feels like temperature, which can sometimes be a little bit more of a clearer message to the general public. Now, heat index or the feels like temperature takes into account both temperature and humidity to figure out what the temperature feels like outside. And we use the table on the left to make that determination. So let's say, for example, the temperature is 90 degrees outside and the relative humidity is 70%. So if you go to the location on the graph where those two numbers meet, you get a value of 105. So 105 would be the heat index or the feels like temperature for those certain conditions. And on the bottom, you can see what type of likelihood of heat disorders could occur in those certain types of temperatures. So in the orange shading, which is what that value is, you would be in the danger rating. And we have values of caution, extreme caution, danger, and extreme danger in the colors provided. The criteria we have in our county warning area for a heat advisory is greater than or equal to 95 degrees for 2 or more hours for the states of New York and Vermont, or a heat index value of 95 to 99 degrees for 2 consecutive days, or values of 100 to 104 for any duration for Massachusetts and Connecticut. When we issue an extreme heat warning, that is when we expect heat index values to be greater than or equal to 105 degrees, and that is any duration for all of our 4 states. It is very important when we have a very hot day to not forget anyone in a hot vehicle. Unfortunately, we do have many instances a year of children or pets being left inside of a hot vehicle and being susceptible to heat-related illnesses. So this infographic shows you some reminders that you can have in place to ensure that you don't forget anyone in a hot car, such as placing a bag or other item in the back seat to remind you that passengers are in the back seat after you park. Or place a stuffed animal in the front seat as a reminder to check for passengers. You can also consider additional methods such as a phone alarm, a partner buddy check-in, or a built-in car reminder system. On the right, it is very important to know the difference between some heat-related illnesses such as heat exhaustion or heat stroke, and you can see some of the different symptoms of each of those on the graphic on the right. It is very important that if you see anybody dealing with some sort of heat-related illness, be sure to make sure that they are in a cool, air-conditioned place, get plenty of water, and if it is a desperate emergency, don't hesitate to call 911. We're now going to move over to flooding. So this chart here shows the United States flood fatalities across the entire continental United States, or not just continental United States, but all 50 states in a given year. And you can see over the past 11 years, the number of flood fatalities definitely varies from year to year, but you can see there is usually quite a high number of fatalities. You can say on average, roughly maybe 80-ish or so people die per year of a flood fatalities. And the majority of the fatalities occur from people driving into floodwaters. This is why we really try to make note that if you are encountering a flooded roadway, to not drive through that flooded roadway. You can see actually in 2024, we had 182 fatalities during the year, and actually a good majority of those actually occurred in North Carolina due to the impacts from Tropical System Helene. So what is the difference between a flood versus a flash flood? So a flood is any high flow, overflow, or inundation by water which causes or threatens damage. So on the image to the bottom, you can just see we have a roadway here, and we just have a part of the road that is pretty much covered by a little bit of water. You can see they have it blocked off. But these are usually more slower and more gradual floods that occur over time. A flash flood is a more rapid and extreme flow of high water into a normally dry area, or a rapid water level rise in a cream or a streak. So this could be one, let's say we have a thunderstorm producing 2 inches of rain in 1 hour, and you could have a rapid rise of water onto a roadway, which is having a difficult time trying to drain all the water off. And you can see the water level quickly rising, and maybe even collecting upwards of like 6 inches of water on the road in a short period of time. This usually ends up stranding a lot of cars when people are driving. This type of flood requires immediate action to protect life and property. We also have different terms in terms of different terms regarding flooding. We can include street or poor drainage flooding. This is again one where if you have a thunderstorm move through, you can certainly have a period where you can get some standing water in poor drainage areas, or you can just get a little bit of water, maybe an inch or two of water collecting on some roadways. These are usually very short lasting types of flooding, and after the heavy rain ends or the thunderstorm moves away, usually any type of water on the roads or in these poor drainage systems usually dissipates very shortly. River flooding is a little bit different, as river flooding occurs when any area, rivers, creeks, or streams overflow their banks. And usually you just get water downstream of the river flooding some certain communities. And you can see here on the image of right, that is kind of an image of an area that was pretty much impacted by some river flooding. And this flooding will continue for a time, even for hours, if not days, after the rainfall has ended. And it usually continues until after the river crests and recedes and falls below flood stage. And then these floodwaters would eventually gradually just dissipate and move away. To determine our impacts in terms of flooding or to issue awareness of any future flooding, the Weather Prediction Center issues what is called an excessive rainfall outlook. And the outlook is shown on the image to the left, where it shows various different categories and estimates the risk of rainfall exceeding flash flood guidance, potentially leading to some flash flooding within 20 miles of a point. And you can see we have 4 different categories here. We have marginal, slight, moderate, and high. And you can see the probabilities that we have that are of flooding, which constitutes the issuance of each of those categories. So to understand the different WPC excessive rainfall risk categories, if you go to the image on the right, that lists a little bit of an example of what we kind of anticipate when each of these different categories are being issued. And you can see the marginal categories is usually more highlighted toward isolated flash floods, and then the higher categories are indications of more widespread flash flooding expectancy. Some infographics in terms of flooding. Again, it's very important not to underestimate the power of water. So this graphic shows how much water is needed to move various different objects. So 6 inches of fast-moving water can be enough to knock over or carry away an adult. 12 inches can be enough to carry away a small vehicle. And even if you have a larger vehicle, such as an SUV, van, or truck, only 18 to 24 inches of fast-moving water is needed to carry away even those vehicles. It is very important when you have a flood situation, you may not know how deep the water is. So again, it is very important to never drive your vehicle into water of an unknown depth. Nighttime flooding can certainly occur anywhere across the country, including here in eastern New York and western New England. And of course, it is very difficult to see flooding at times during the day, but it is nearly impossible to see flooding at night. So whenever we have any sort of flood situations, be sure to move to higher ground if flooding threatens your area. If you live in a flood-prone area, be alert during periods of heavy rain if you may potentially need to consider relocating or evacuating your home. And again, it is very hard to recognize dangers of flooding at night, so be very careful during times of heavy rainfall if driving during the nighttime hours. We're going to recap just a couple of recent flood events that we had. We will cover the October 31st to November 1st, 2019 flood. This one mainly affected portions of the Mohawk Valley and the Adirondacks, as you see on the image on the right of observed rainfall. Some portions of these areas picked up anywhere between 3 and 7 inches of rain in just a 24-hour period. The image on some of the images on the right show some of the flooding impacts that occurred associated with this. And you can see on the bottom right, for the image for Dairy Hill Road, you can see that road got washed away by floodwaters. So again, it's very important to not drive through a flooded roadway because you cannot be so certain that the road is actually there. We did have one fatality during this event. It occurred in Newport, New York, and this was due to a person being swept away in floodwaters. On the left side, you can see some of the damage reports we received from this event. So everything in green with some of the blue little dots or so on it, that was a flood or a flash flood report. We also had some thunderstorm wind gust reports, as we had some wind damage associated with this event as well. This event brought some significant river flooding and also some record flooding to portions of the Mohawk Valley and the Adirondacks, as you can see on the image on the right. This image shows a couple of hydrographs showing the flood stages of a couple of the rivers that received record river flooding from this event. The one on the left shows the Sacandaga River at Hope rising to a level of 12.26 feet, which exceeded the previous record flood stage of 12.0. On the right was the Mohawk River at Little Falls. You can see that also reached a record flood height, reaching 19.86 feet. Which broke the previous record of 19.7 feet. In 2020, we had a flash flood event that occurred very local, right around Whitehall, New York. You can see with the radar loop on the left, you can see that there were a series of thunderstorms that went through Whitehall and kind of trained over the same area for a short period of time, producing very significant rainfall in just a few hours. On the right showed our radar estimated precipitation that occurred from these thunderstorms, and the white circle area with the yellow shading showed radar estimates as high as 6.6 inches falling in just a 2 to 4 hour period. We did have a co-op observer also measure 5.85 inches of rain at their location from these thunderstorms. Here are some of the pictures showing the damage that occurred in Whitehall. So you can see Route 22 was completely flooded, and you can see that cars were submerged under these floodwaters on the two images on the left. On the right was some damage to the Whitehall Central School. You can see that there was some water inside of an auditorium and then also in what looks to be the gymnasium of the school. And we thank Tim Hardy for providing these photos. The future of flooding, especially river flooding, is going to be done by what is called flood inundation mapping. And this is a continuous, updated type of product that is soon going to be issued by the National Weather Service. So what this does is this takes a certain point and give a more clear analysis as to what floods when the rivers are at certain heights above flood. You can see on the left side, this example is from the Hudson River at Fort Edward. And you can see on the left, again, with a hydrograph that was shown, it at least shows the height at which the river is at. And then initially, it gives you a little bit of a statement saying what tends to flood at that height. So you can see the Hudson River at Fort Edward is at a height just over 27 feet. So if you go to the explanation of what happens at that flood level, you can see that water is over the concrete wall at the Fort Edward Yacht Basin, and several homes nearby have water approaching them. What this doesn't state is which homes are impacted and which homes are not. And this is what flood inundation mapping is expected to do over time. So an example of what the Hudson River at Fort Edward would show when the river is at or exceeding 27 feet is shown in the red shading. Anything in the red shading would be something that would be flooded if the river rose to at least 27 feet. So you can see by doing that, we have separate areas outside of the red circled area that wouldn't necessarily be impacted at this height. And this would improve emergency response to determine what needs to be closed or shut down and what could be flooded, and if there are some people who will need to evacuate, but also highlight some areas that would not be impacted by this flooding and would not need to do any sort of evacuations. So this is going to be the future of flood inundation mapping, and this product will continue to evolve over the coming years. This is it for part 5 of this lesson. Thank you for listening, and when you're ready, you can move on to part 6. Thank you again.